All right. Can you all see those slides? Yes, great.
Yes.
All right. So, thank you all for coming today and to the Clean Water Program for inviting me to come and talk about Lake Watershed Action Plans and how they're used as a community tool to increase water quality. I'm going to give a overview of what a Lake Watershed Action Plan is, how they work, sort of the different touch points. In the process that engage the community. And then I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Niccolai and Bill Minard. Lisa is here from the White River Conservation District, as you heard, and Bill is from the Lake Morey Protective Association. They're going to be talking sort of about a case study of the Lake Morey Lake Watershed Action Plan. So we can really dig into the ways that the community outreach and education and involvement in that LWAP really helped to make it a successful project. So with that said, I'm going to talk to you all about what a Lake Watershed Action Plan is. Oh, I can't do it that way. So what is a Lake Watershed Action Plan or an LWAP? A Lake Watershed Action Plan is an assessment and planning tool with the goal of identifying the greatest threats to the health of a lake that is coming from the shoreline. So essentially, with the Lake Watershed Action Plan, we're looking to answer two questions. What are the sources of nutrient pollution into a lake, and what can we do about those sources? The end product of the assessment is a plan that identifies problem areas, identifies the possible fixes, and prioritizes those fixes, projects, using a series of factors. So the results of an LWAP is a series of potentially implementable projects that are going to increase the health of the lake. So why? Why are we doing this at all? Well, we know a couple of things, right? We know that Vermont's lake shores are very highly developed. And we also know that our lake shores have pretty poor development when compared to some of our neighboring states. Vermont lakes have actually been measured to be below the national average for the health of the shoreland by the EPA. We know that development strongly correlates with pollution, and we know that when a lake's natural vegetation is removed for that development, that wildlife habitat degrades, shores erode, and nutrient loading into lakes increases. So basically, we know that we have this problem of highly intensely developed lake shores in Vermont. And so Lake Watershed Action Plans were developed as a way to sort of combat that level of development and try to find sources of pollution to make sure that our lakes stay clean. Okay. This is a whole watershed approach. So this is really a holistic approach to looking at water quality management. For anyone who's not familiar, a watershed is sort of the land around an area that is draining into a common body of water. The lowest point in the landscape often is going to be a lake, and all of the streams are flowing into it. All of the, runoff from developed area is flowing into it. And so it's important that we look not just in the lake, not just around the shoreline of the lake, but at the entire watershed that's draining into the lake to find those sources of nutrient pollution. So this is a holistic watershed-wide approach. Within an LWAP, there are three key areas of assessment. Those assessment areas are shoreline sources, stream sources, and roadway sources. And actually, just this year, we're adding wetlands as one of our assessment types as well. But for the purposes of this presentation and the Lake Morey LWAP, which has already been completed, these are the three areas of assessment that we're mostly talking about. So for the shoreland, we're looking for areas of erosion. That's usually due to shoreline development practices that are too close to the edge of the lake and that remove vegetation. For roads, we're looking at stormwater runoff from roadways that are adding pollution and sediment into the lake. And I think we also know, if you've driven by many of Vermont's lakes, a lot of roads are built right along the lakeshore and can be prone to undercutting and erosion from all of that wave and ice action in the lake. And then we look at streams and tributaries into lakes. So we're looking at sources of erosion that are further inland from the lake. And that erosion can be due to a number of factors like forestry, agricultural practices, and other factors that are causing sediments to enter into the streams and flow into the lake. So where are we doing these? How are locations determined? What lakes are going to get LWAPs? So when DEC staff at Lakes and Ponds are looking at where to target these watersheds, we are looking at a couple of key factors. One really important thing that we're looking for is significantly increasing phosphorus trends. Phosphorus is the limiting nutrient in lake systems, and an excess of it can cause a lot of different problems, including algae blooms and algae growth, which is going to decrease dissolved oxygen in the water. And overall, it's just going to throw the lake habitat out of balance. So we're looking for significantly increasing phosphorus trends. We're also looking for disturbed watersheds. Most of the watersheds in Vermont are disturbed, but we need to make sure that the watersheds that we're looking at do have the assessment types that we're going to look at. So if a watershed is not very developed and doesn't have any shoreland development or doesn't have any roads in it, an LWAP is maybe not going to be the appropriate assessment type for that lake, even if it does have a highly significantly increasing phosphorus trend. It's likely that the sources are going to be different from the things that we would be looking at in an LWAP. So making sure that the watershed is in fact disturbed. We're also, and maybe most importantly, looking for active and engaged lake associations or other user groups in that area. And this is, the point of the entire talk. It is extremely pivotal for the success of these LWAPs that there be a local group that is interested and engaged and ready to take on the projects that are going to come out of an LWAP. Without an engaged local group, it's very hard to get in front of people. And one of the key things about these LWAPs is that the projects that come out of them are by and large going to be non-regulatory projects, which means they're on private land and they have to be agreed to by private individuals in order to be accomplished. So having that local engaged group to help get the contractor in front of people, help facilitate conversations, help hold a public meeting, help give that kind of local knowledge that you just don't get from looking at a GIS database or an aerial map. All of those factors are really important. And so we really like to target areas that have an active and engaged group, or use outreach tools at our disposal before doing an LWAP in order to kind of get a group engaged and interested and active in the community. So those are our top ways that we're looking at where these LWAPs are happening. There are multiple different funding sources for LWAPs, however. So those are the criteria that DEC Lakes and Ponds is looking at when we are funding LWAPs. There are also a couple of other groups that will fund them, and all of the groups that are funding them are in some ways restricted by their geography. So other funding groups are like the Lake Champlain Basin Program, which only funds projects in the Lake Champlain Basin, and the Clean Water Service Providers, who are also only funding projects in their region. DEC Lakes and Ponds has a little bit more flexibility, but we have been focusing recently outside of the Champlain and Memphremagog basins because those do have other sources of funding available to them. So for example, Lake Morey is outside of those two basins and has had an LWAP. Really quickly, in case anyone is not familiar with our lake scorecard, I just wanted to go over that a little bit because it is one of the tools that we're using to determine where we're targeting our Lake Watershed Action Plans. So this is the lake scorecard, I think for Eden. Yes, for Eden. Eden was the first LWAP that we did in Vermont. And there were a lot of community concerns over the increased sediment and phosphorus levels in the lake. And those were the main drivers of the Lake Watershed Action Plan there. So you can see here, this is a publicly available scorecard, just in case anybody's not familiar with it, that is going to give a score for your shoreland condition, your water quality trends, mercury invasive species. It shows the disturbed level of the watershed. Here you see it's moderately disturbed. And the water quality standards were showing that this was a stressed lake environment. So this is available online if anyone wants to look at a lake that they're interested in. And it also has sort of this second page that is showing spring phosphorus, summer phosphorus, summer secchi, which is just measuring the clarity of the water, and chlorophyll, which is a good way of sort of estimating algae growth in the water. But you can see here the summer phosphorus, which is measuring, the input of phosphorus from the tributaries in the lake, had a highly significantly increasing trend going from oligotrophic around 1990 to mesotrophic in the 2020. So that trend alerted us to the fact that something needed to be done in this watershed to kind of curb the inputs of phosphorus. All right, so where have we done these to date? It's getting to be a pretty long list, which is really exciting for me. You can see we started with Lake Eden. That LWAP finished up in 2019, and we go all the way to the Echo and Seymour LWAP, which just wrapped up in January. Each of these Lake Watershed Action Plans has a prioritized list of projects that came out of it that is going to hopefully be pursued. Those projects are going to get implemented, and hopefully we're going to see a reduction in phosphorus levels in these lakes. This is the list of where LWAPs are currently happening. And I just wanted to show this. Many of these are sort of in the middle points of being in process. And the last two, Sabin Pond and Carey and Pilots Bay, will be starting in the spring. So we are chugging along on these LWAPs, getting them done and creating those lists of projects. So I mentioned funding a little bit in the beginning, but I did want to just quickly say there's 4 ways of funding an LWAP. There's the DEC enhancement money. That's the money that's coming from lakes and ponds. That's where the majority of LWAPs are getting funded. Those lakes are selected by the Lakes and Ponds program, and RFPs are put out. The Lake Champlain Basin Fund has also funded a number of Lake Watershed Action Plans, and I think all but one of these is now fully completed. The clean water service providers, like I mentioned, are able to fund LWAPs. So far, only one QUISP has made the decision to fund an LWAP, and that is the South Lake QUISP, who's funded the Lake Bombazine LWAP. And finally, I just want to give a little shout out to Lake Dunmore and Fern Lake Association, who decided that they were just going to self-fund their own LWAP and raised funds and hired their own contractor. And they've actually completed that LWAP and completed many projects out of it, which has been really great to see. So all of these are different ways to fund LWAPs. They can be a little different based on what the funding source is. I'm only going to talk about DEC LWAPs that are funded through the Lakes and Ponds program, just to make it a little simpler. So what are the outcomes? So as I mentioned, these are assessment and planning tools, and we look at those 3 areas of assessment. And so contractor will spend their summers, looking at the roads and the streams and the shoreline. And the outcome of all of this is a prioritized list of projects that are going to address the input of nutrients. Those projects are then prioritized using a custom prioritization matrix. And a handful of those, it can vary between LWAPs how many, are selected to move on to 30% design by the stakeholders. So let me just go ahead. So what are we talking about when we're talking about prioritization of projects? So prioritization is looking at the benefit that the proposed project will have from several angles. Typically, we're looking at water quality benefits like phosphorus reduction, sediment retention, other things. And then we also look at how actually feasible is the project by looking at, how does the landowner feel about it? And as well as the cost and the feasibility of just, getting to the project site. And then we're also looking at operation and maintenance, lifespan, et cetera. And then we move on to co-benefits. And co-benefits are the area where things like chronic problem areas, projects that are going to reduce flood risk, highly visible and or educational, and projects that are going to enhance habitat, natural communities, that's where those sort of project benefits are going to be accounted for. And the co-benefits area is where the community is going to have the biggest influence in the prioritization process. And this section of the prioritization matrix is what fluctuates the most depending on the desires of the community. So a good example of that would be the Echo Seymour LWAP that just was completed. In the course of doing the assessments there, the team, had found out that the biggest contributor to phosphorus in that watershed was actually problems with the roads. And then after they had sort of figured this out last summer, we had major storms in that area and several roads were completely washed out and blown out. And so the community voiced their opinion that flood resiliency was a big topic of concern for them. And so 2 out of the 4 projects for that LWAP ended up being road design projects because the community really wanted their roads to be better. Not only was it the biggest source of phosphorus, but it was also a flood risk. Okay. So this is just an example of what these prioritization tables look like. This is a screenshot from the Willoughby prioritization matrix. It's only showing a very small amount of what is in that spreadsheet. At Willoughby, 75 projects were identified. The LWAB team evaluated the potential projects, assigned them a ranking that reflected the assumed potential water quality benefits. And then because 75 projects is a huge amount of projects, the team selected the 30 highest priority projects for a more in-depth prioritization based on their methodology. And then the top 30 ended up in the priority matrix that's shown here and received project scoping sheets. And from those 30, they selected 5 for 30% design. So you can see how you start with this really big list of all identified projects and sort of whittle them down to what is going to be the most impactful, what's the most important to the community, et cetera. But the matrix and the project list exists, and it exists as a to-do list for later for the lake. These projects are all worthy projects and they're all impactful in their own ways. And so while those designs that end up with the 30% design at the end of the LWAP are probably going to be the first ones to be implemented, all of the prioritized list, hopefully over time, is going to get gone through and those projects will be hopefully implemented. Of course, again, it depends on landowner agreement, but that's the hope. So I've mentioned project sheets. I just wanted to quickly show what a project sheet looks like. It's a one-page field sheet that's showing a map. It's showing some before pictures. These are again from the Eden LWAP. I'm going to show this same project in different stages just so you get an idea of how this project implementation works. But this basically identified an area where stormwater was running straight down a driveway into a parking lot and then over a beach, washing everything out. This is at the Eden recreation area. And that went from that project sheet to now this is the 30% design. The 30% design is sort of a rough draft design, basically showing here's the parking area, here's where we're suggesting a bioretention basin, here's where we're suggesting a swale, a vegetated swale. Here are some areas where culverts might be useful. And this was the end product of that LWAP was, I mean, there were more than one design, but this is one design that came out of that LWAP. And then that design was, funded for 100% design and then implementation. Here's a picture of that same area during the implementation process. So just to the right of all of this dirt is the parking lot, and to the left is the beach. And then this is what it looked like when the project was fully implemented. So a nice vegetated swale, a nice bioretention area, a place to store their kayaks, and a protected beach, and hopefully a lake with a little less phosphorus in it. So that's basically the process. And I hope I've explained it well enough that we can sort of talk about the community aspects next. I do just want to give a shout out to who is actually performing all of this work. So all of the funding sources that I mentioned put these projects out to bid or give out grants in order to do the work. And contracts and grants are often awarded to natural resource conservation districts, like in the case study that we're going to talk about today. They could be awarded to environmental contracting firms. They could go to other kinds of watershed groups or even lake associations in some instances. And then the technical guidance and oversight is provided by DEC. So just a shout out to all the groups who have put in a lot of time and effort and hard work on long field days actually completing these LWAPs. So finally, I can take questions now or wait till the end, but if there's anything anyone is like needing to be cleared up about the process before we really get into talking about the community aspects and how important they are, happy to take those questions now. All right, I will stop sharing, maybe. Maybe I don't know how to stop sharing. There we go. All right, if there's no questions, I guess it's Lisa and Bill.
Okay, great. I had a few pictures which I can share if that makes sense, or I can just talk. I don't know. I just did them up.
Before we move on, we did get a question in the chat from Minda King. and they're just wondering what organizations, government or otherwise, they can work with, aside from
So,
maybe what you've just listed.
so in terms of like what organizations are getting the funding to do the watershed action plans? That would be water, yeah, watershed groups, natural resource conservation districts. There's I don't know exactly how many natural resource conservation districts, but they're more or less somewhat aligned with the counties. Um, Watershed nonprofits like Memphremagog Watershed Association comes to mind, or Friends of Northern Lake Champlain is another nonprofit group. And then environmental consulting firms, number of them throughout the state. All right. Looks like that's it. So
Okay. Well, if there are more questions, we can definitely we'll have time at the end, I guess, to ask them. So I guess I would say I'm Lisa Niccolai. I work with the White River Conservation District. And as you saw from Alison's presentation, we completed the Lake Fairley LWAP and then started the Lake Morey LWAP. Kind of they sort of overlapped quite a bit. And they're two lakes that are quite close to each other and kind of in the same parts of them are in the same town and things like that. So we learned, cut our teeth on the first one and hopefully had things a little more figured out by the second one, but I don't know. And basically what we did was apply for the funding. And when we were awarded, we then subcontracted to Bear Creek Environmental that did a lot of the field work and the inventory from that side. And then as the district, we took on sort of the outreach and that component of organizing teams and trying to be more of an interface. And it was really interesting because we hadn't done a whole lot in Lake Morey. So it was like a new opportunity, but there's also a lot of camps on both of the lakes. And so by doing the first LWAP on Lake Fairley, we got to know some of the camps and that sort of spread over to the next lake. And they're very large landowners on these two lakes. So it was really important from our perspective to have we sort of built the relationship a little bit, got some trust going, and they were much more willing to have us come on to their property and take a look around. Some of these camps were very old and things had been done a certain way for a long time. So initially there was some reservation about whether that was going to be, something that they were ready to talk about. And it turned out to be a really positive. And now we're taking one project. We've just completed the 100% design for the engineering, and we'll start to apply for implementation funds and sort of starting that whole process again on this Lake Morey. Another component of that was, and one thing that I really like about the LWAPs is there's a boat trip. So one of the first things we did was to get everybody together and go out on a boat and just sort of have a look at the shoreline and get some ideas and get a chance to talk with the organizations, and sort of people could sort of point out where they thought, because they're the ones who are there during the summer and see the most. And so I find that to be just a really helpful way to kind of get the lay of the land and hear some of the inside scoop about what's going on. And then another part of that was getting to know Bill Minard, who'll be talking in a few minutes. Lake Morey is pretty unique in our area in that it doesn't have just one, but it has 3 organizations that are dedicated to the lake. So there's the Lake Morey Protection Association that Bill's working with. And then there's the Lake Morey Foundation, which does a lot of fundraising. And then there's a Lake Morey Commission, which interfaces with the town quite a bit. And so a lot of people really interested in this lake. It was sort of an interesting lake because it had one of the early alum treatments back in the 80s, and that to address some of the phosphorus. And it seemed like that had sort of reached the end of its useful functional life. And so there was an algae bloom while we were sort of in the middle of this, which raised a lot of attention and concern about the lake, which is horrible, but also helpful because people were really thinking about water quality and their role. And then a huge shout out to Bill, because one of the components that the district was sort of taking on was doing the lake-wise assessments. And I think the grant required us to do maybe 10, and Bill and his group at the Lake Morey Protection Association did such a good job that I did 29. And so we blew through the budget, but we got to know a lot of people, and it was amazingly helpful to go and talk to all those different people and have a look at their property and just help them to understand what was going on and how their property impacted the lake. So it's sort of a little bit ancillary to what's going on, but it was incredibly useful to have this opportunity to sort of explain things, because a lot of people are like, yeah, the driveway's a pain, and that's sort of where it stops. But because of the way this whole process worked, we were able, there were a few driveways where we were able to identify them as large enough concerns so that they got the 30% design. And then one landowner just said, great, I'm going to take this and get a contractor in here and take care of this. So, I think they had sort of shrugged their shoulders for many years and been like, we don't know what to do with it. So by us sort of getting out there and talking to the community and, doing these sorts of things, people are like, oh, okay, there is something we can do. And, since doing these LWAPs, I've received a bunch of phone calls from people who are like, hey, can you explain this to me? Or do you have any ideas on this? So as a conservation district, that's really what we want to be, is a resource for the community. That's there sort of for the long haul. That's really focused on water quality issues. And so that was a really exciting upshot of all this, was that, we have sort of cultivated, friendships and relationships and been able to, speak and participate in what's going on. And now actually, the LWAP itself seemed like a lot of work, but the really big haul is now getting these projects implemented and kind of continuing to work with landowners and find people who are willing to do this and get the funds to actually implement these projects. And there is funding available, so that's exciting. And that was a big incentive for talking to people, was saying, if your project is identified as a top priority, it gains, extra points in the whole funding process. And a lot of people, a lot of these are municipal projects or town, beaches or things like that, where funding is a huge concern. And so while they may recognize that it's a problem, they don't have the funding to cope with it. So it was really helpful to be able to do that. And then I think also having the meetings as we went through the process, to be able to pull together people, say, hey, here's what we're finding, and how does this sound right to you? Is this something that you have any thoughts about? A lot of people were like, oh yeah, you should talk to so-and-so, or go up there and, we'll get you in touch with this person. And that was also a really important part for doing the LWAP, was, you have to get permission to kind of go up onto people's properties if the streams run through. And sometimes getting a postcard from somebody who you don't know, people initially were a little reluctant to allow us onto their property, but when they spoke to a neighbor or somebody who was more familiar with the process that we were going through, we were able to get access and talk to the right people. So there's a tremendous amount of community involvement that's required to take the information that we're collecting and then also bring it to something that's useful, I think, and that will have an impact on the lake. So, Bill, I don't know if you have how much you'd like to say about how the process went from your perspective.
Sure. How much would you like me to speak to? But from our process, it was a couple pieces of information about Lake Morey that might be helpful. We're about 547 acres with about 100 dwellings around the lake. We're very fortunate, and we have a very effective lake association with almost 100% membership from all of the places, which is a bit unique in Vermont. And we have a very effective organization. We also have an active and effective website. And all of those things, I think, helped us as we provided support for this whole process. Our president, Laura Tucker, is very thorough and thoughtful. And when this opportunity came across her desk to participate in a WAP, she used that word opportunity, as did I. And so at our annual meeting that takes place in July, where we usually have 80, 90, 100 members participate, she introduced it briefly. And because she had put together a committee that consisted of about of 6 lake members, and she asked if I would chair that, which I couldn't say no to. And it was an excellent experience for myself as well. But my take when I was presenting to the membership was that this was an opportunity. And I think if I had a label to my little speech would be, what legacy do you want to leave your children? And went into arm twisting, you might say, in regards to participating in the Lakewise program, and as well allowing access to private roads and tributaries, which is really the and I think the main piece of supporting the whole WAP process. And Lisa, you mentioned the boat ride, which I was on as well. It was a really great opportunity to get stakeholders together and to circulate around the lake and point out from our historical perspective. So I believe that piece was important. So how did we twist arms to get people to participate in Lakewise might be a question, because we ended up with a pretty good participation, and it hasn't ended. I know we still have people who are working on their properties to receive the Lakewise award. So, and that will keep going on, even though our WAP has officially ended. Lakewise continues. Thank you to the support of DEC, and I should interject the importance of the DEC and the relationship, at least with our lake association. There are amazing people working for DEC, and they've done a lot for our lake. Lisa alluded to our Sino blooms. That was in some ways very good timing, because it was alarming, and I was able to present to, you can do something about this in some way to contribute. So we twisted some arms, and we will twist some more in regards to the Lakewise program. I think what we found important was emphasizing to people that we were not judging people's properties, and there was no enforcement piece. It was, I would use the term education probably to describe really what takes place. So for my own property, my wife and I, about 6 years ago, participated in Lakewise, and it was educational. We did not receive the award, but there were recommendations for us to follow, which we did, and I could explain basically what we did. And then Lisa came back this last, the summer before, and conducted another Lakewise assessment, for which in our changes were adequate to, so that we also got the award. And the program does have signs for the recipients of the awards, and that's encouraging for others to participate now that we have about 30 signs up around the lake as people take notice of that. Our website and our newsletters are also quite effective in conveying to people the importance for them to participate. So what did we specifically do to change our property? We have a small lawn area, and reducing that is probably significant for any property owners on lakes, as well as creating buffer zones that would involve some plantings, any bare spots. We significantly narrowed our walkway down. That at one point you could drive down, and there was evidence of some runoff coming off from our walkway. So we have eliminated a berm, sloped it, and narrowed it significantly. And as well, we put some crushed stone behind our eaves. And I think those things were adequate enough so that on Lisa's evaluation, we were eligible to receive that award. And I think my things for people is education in regards to encouraging people to reduce lawn and also reduce raking. It seems to be a society norm for us to want to rake all the leaves off our property, of which I've been guilty at some point, but creating duff is extremely important for property owners. And I don't think I knew what duff was 10 years ago, but the duff that comes from leaving your leaves on your ground that will decompose and create an absorbing layer that really helps with water runoff. So I'm often in front of our association, because I do present, this has been a 3-year process of any of our members will tell you that I am speaking frequently about duff and lawns and as well septic systems. So in regards to septic systems, the Lake-wise program doesn't assess septic systems except for maintenance of them. But as a piece of our WAP, we did invite Kristen Ashmankis from DEC, who conducted a wastewater management workshop that was really helpful. We did it with our sister Lake Fairley, and we had good participation there. She is really excellent. And then what I'd also like to share with you is the importance of reading the report afterwards. It was a bit daunting when the report was produced. I looked at it and it was 100 pages, but I read it and I learned some things. So I'll just share a couple of things that I learned from our particular report. One was the phosphorus loading, that our lake is within mountains or hills, so we don't have a lot of farm runoff coming onto our property. So the phosphorus that in our lake we call legend phosphorus, and I thought it might have come from sheep farming 150 years ago from our hillsides. But what the report states is the construction boom of 1890 to 1920 created a lot of our phosphorus. And it makes so much sense as I look at my own property. About that time, the building was constructed and also a boathouse was put into that really, I am sure, disrupted significantly the shoreline there. So that was educational for me to read the report. And one other little piece I learned in there is that caffeine is an anthropogenic marker. Who knew that? Or I did not know that. So that our lake was tested for caffeine, which there's a correlation between the effectiveness of septic systems and caffeine levels in lakes. So I encourage people to read the report. And our report is available if anybody would like to see what a WAP looks like, a completed one, on our website, which is lakemorey.org. And I'm sure there are other access avenues for finding that from DEC. So I think that's kind of to summarize. It was we really appreciated the opportunity. People have made some changes. There are some recommended projects. They've been prioritized, and we're going to keep moving forward. One other little piece I'd put in, the importance of involving town officials in this too. They're important stakeholders. We have our association has an excellent relationship with town government and administrators, and getting them on board was a critical piece of this as well. Have I used my allotted time?
Yeah,
That was perfect.
you did
Thank you
great.
so much.
I could continue, but I don't know if there are any questions in the chat box or if anybody
I
has any
think
questions. Or
I think
Lisa,
it
do you
is
have a?
time for our Q&A, but
Okay.
first I'm gonna initiate our little poll. Thank you all so much for sharing all of this. This has been awesome. But let me go ahead and launch our little poll, and while we're doing that, we can think about some questions for our three presenters. But here we are. And just to highlight what Rachel said in the chat, feel free to start asking questions if you want to raise your hand or drop something in the chat. Okay, Arminda's asked, why do you think a rural community like Vermont would have such high levels? Is that referring to phosphorus or a different kind of pollutant? Yes, in relation to phosphorus.
Uh, Phosphorus comes from lots of different sources, one of which is agriculture. So in a rural state, that's going to be a big contributor to phosphorus, but also development roads. We have a lot of dirt roads in Vermont, a lot of private roads around lakes that are often dirt and are often not managed the best. Um, and yeah, if you think about our assessment types, forestry and agriculture in our watersheds can affect our stream water quality, which flows into the lake water quality. So maybe different sources than a more highly developed area, but there's still plenty of phosphorus out there.
And I have a question. So how, not how difficult, but what is your biggest challenge when coordinating across so many different partners to get an LWAP in place in terms of relationship management? If anyone can answer, it doesn't matter who.
It's a good question for Lisa, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't sure what level we were talking about. So I think for us, it was a little bit of just kind of getting the lay of the land with three different organizations and towns. And there's on Lake Morey, at least, there's a big resort at one end. There's several camps. Some of them are owned by the same foundation. Some of them are separate. So you just have all these different people that have different priorities, and trying to reach out to them, get to know them, and sort of cultivate enough trust so that they'll let you come onto their property and help them manage. That was definitely tricky, and I can't tell you how much I lived in fear of forgetting to invite somebody to one of our meetings, because there were so many people who were really caring and really involved, and sometimes you're just like, oh my gosh, did I miss anybody on this invite? And it did keep me up quite a bit while I worried about that. So.
And one thing I want to add that I meant to say during my presentation, there are like touch points for the community built into our contracts. So we really do at DEC want to like emphasize the importance of doing exactly what Lisa just said and like reaching out to all the different partners. There's a kickoff meeting in the beginning. There's like a set, like the boat tour is another really good example of a way to get the community to do assessment kind of with you. The other assessment types aren't really like conducive to having a big group of people, but a pontoon boat ride is like a great time to have a bunch of people. Those are the only time I get to go on the water, honestly. So I really like them. But then there's prioritization. There's a lot of that like public engagement kind of baked into how DEC is asking our partners to do these assessments. And I think that that is one of the reasons why they are successful in not just identifying projects, but like moving them forward. Because you can identify projects all you want, but like if you can't get permission to actually do them, then it doesn't really matter.
And I would say, as somebody who, having been through two of them, initially when I looked at some of those touch points that Alison called them, I was like, gosh, we have to do this? Like, really? Huh, okay. But in the end, it was, I'm being honest, right? Like,
I understand.
in the end, there was a real, it was valuable, and it did function to sort of keep us on schedule and keep us focused, because it's very easy to get distracted about what's going on in one section and not sort of bring it all together and make sure that you're sharing the information with everybody. Because I think that's, we don't want it to just be like, what do we call them, shelf trophies, where it just sits there and nobody ever looks at it. So I'm impressed that Bill even read the 100 pages like that right off the bat. So success.
Thank you. And we have another question in the chat. Have you assessed the impact of climate change to increase phosphorus in the studied lakes? That's from Mohammed.
Yeah, so that's a big question. There's a couple ways that climate change can affect the amount of phosphorus in the lakes, and there's sort of the external loading and the internal loading. Externally, I mean, we know that heavier, bigger rainstorms are going to increase the amount of sediments that can potentially enter the lakes. And what can we do about that? I mean, some of these projects that we're suggesting that are going to fix some erosion problems, that are going to add buffers to our streams and our lake shores, those are all still the solutions to combating climate change at like a really small scale. Internal loading, I'm not the best person to talk about that, but my understanding is that warmer temperatures can help release some of that legacy phosphorus and cause some of those algae blooms. So we're definitely aware of that problem. The solutions are still in the works, let's say.
And we have another question from Arminda. What has been your most successful tactic of working with farmers, industry, the environment, and the public?
I think maybe that's one I should take.
Yeah.
And I think some of what we've talked about, where just trying to get to know, like Bill was tremendously helpful in just talking to people that know him, and they didn't necessarily know me, but once he talked to them, kind of people had a level of comfort that we weren't regulatory, we were more educational. So that was big. Another thing that was very helpful was saying, if your project works its way to the top of our list, it becomes eligible for additional funding, and we can help you with that. And that's something that I think a lot of people are like, well, that's a great idea, but I don't have the money to rebuild a seawall at the moment or something like that. And so by being able to say, we'll continue to work with you and come up with a bioengineered solution to this that is beneficial to both of us, really helped people to think about like, okay, this is a problem, I need to address it. And, maybe there are other ways of dealing with this problem than letting the deteriorating seawall crumble. And so I think we don't have a lot of industry particularly in this area, so I didn't really have to do with that, but there were the sort of businesses, the camps and the resort, and if you look at their properties, you would say, oh, we have a lot of lawn to lake, but that's sort of what their business model is based on. So it was trying to hear what their concerns were. Like for the camps, they need line of sight because they're in charge of other people's children who are swimming and boating, and so sort of listening to what the concern is and why it's like that, and then looking for ways that we could say, okay, so in this beach area, you have to have it completely clear for safety. And, we wouldn't want you to change that. But hey, what about this area over here where the campers don't ever go over there? Could we make this buffer wider? Could we plant trees here? So really kind of working with the constraints that these people, have in regards to their business, I think was very, did a lot to sort of build the trust and the relationship, and hopefully improve what's flowing into the lake as best we could. In some cases, you have to be able to see a swim area with 50 campers. So, that's not ideal, but, you can do what you can do. So,
Yeah.
and
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
go ahead. No, that's it. Go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly add, I think the LWAPs are really all about carrots and not about sticks. They're all voluntary projects. And sort of as the practitioners, at the end of the day, we do have to respect that this is private property, and we're making suggestions. And I think Lisa's done a really good job of that with the camps on Morey and Fairley. But there have been some instances where projects have been proposed, 30% designs have been done, and the community has really pushed back against those. And in those cases, those projects have either been modified to meet the needs of those communities, or just haven't gone, through the entire process, because we're not trying to force things on people. We're completely non-regulatory, so we really don't have a mechanism to do that even if we wanted to. So that importance of that community engagement is also important as a way to say no if that's what the community wants on their public beach or something like that. So yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, if there's no other questions, I think we can start to wrap things up. But thank you so much, Bill, Lisa, and Allison, for presenting. This was an amazing talk. And thank you so much for your answers to all of these questions as well. And just looking forward towards the next clean water conversation, we will be hosting it on Teams as well on March 27th, which is also a Thursday, and we hope to see you all there. I will drop the link to go register in the chat and look for a follow-up email from me as well. But if there's no other questions, I think it is time for us to go.
Thank you for putting this together. It was great.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Lisa and Bill, for joining me.
All
My
right.
pleasure.
Awesome. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.